3 of the fantasy football season, and here's the top 12 defense DST units I'm ranking this week. The first one, the Los Angeles Chargers. So far the Chargers, they had a good week 1 in fantasy leagues and fantasy points, but then week 2 they didn't do much in that ball game. But right here, a good matchup in week 3 back home is this Charger team versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. So right now they got Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, and Derwin James as their main men on that defense here. And this Jacksonville Jaguar offense, it's looked pretty decent, no doubt about it, the first 2 weeks of the season here. But they haven't versed a defense like the Chargers yet, especially with this pass rush as well. So week 1 versus the Raiders, 19 points allowed, 6 sacks and 3 interceptions. And week 2 with the Chiefs, obviously a very tough matchup where you didn't expect them to do much. 21 points allowed and a sack in that one. So right here, week 3, a good matchup versus Jacksonville, where I think they could get to Trevor Lawrence early and often, get a couple turnovers, possibly find the end zone. And their defense were great matchups, week 4 at Houston and week 5 at Cleveland as well. So right now, they weren't just a 1-week pickup. They were also a defense that is number 1 this week, in my opinion, and a defense you could use for at least the next few weeks. The next defense is the New Orleans Saints. So the Saints here have a good matchup with division rival, the Carolina Panthers. Week 1 in Atlanta, it's 26 points allowed, 2 fumble recoveries, a block kick. In week 2 versus Tampa, they held their own until the fourth quarter when Brady got going. 14 points allowed, a sack, and a fumble recovery. So week 3 here, pretty good matchup with the Carolina Panthers. Baker Mayfield, he's been struggling so far in the first 2 ball games. Last week versus the Giants, only 16 points scored by this Carolina offense. And in week 1, I know they scored 24, but lost to the Cleveland Browns as well. So I think the Saint pass rush could get to Baker a few times. And Mayfield, he's good for 1 or 2 turnovers a game. So my defenses to start video, I had the Saints. And right here in the top 12 rankings, I got them at number 2 this week. Number 3, the Los Angeles Rams. So the Rams, a lot of people, they're just sour on them for whatever reason. After week 1, Buffalo destroyed them, but they still had 31 points allowed. I know it's not good, but 2 sacks, 2 windows, 2 fumble recoveries. And then last week versus Atlanta, I thought they would have a better fantasy day, is the Rams. 25 points allowed, 3 sacks, 2 windows, a fumble recovery. But right here at Arizona, division rival in the NFC West, I think they could make a few plays on Kyler Murray. Murray, we know, he just likes putting that ball up for grabs at times, and he does mistakes. And this Ram defense, they turnovers, and we saw it in week 1, 3 turnovers caused, and the last week with 2 turnovers caused. So right here at Arizona, I think they're good for a few turnovers. And if they could find the end zone somehow in this one, is this Ram defense, they're definitely going to have a good week. But I got them in number 3. Number 4, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So far, it's been a tale of 2 type of defensive performances for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the early going this season. Week 1 at Cincinnati, 26 fantasy points, 20 points allowed, 7 sacks, 4 windows, fumble recovery, a touchdown, a block kick in that one. And week 2 versus New England, they only held them to 17 points, but only an interception. So week 3 here, Cleveland, Thursday Night Football in tonight's ball game. Jacoby Brissett and the Cleveland Browns. I think this Pittsburgh defense could get to Brissett early and often. Brissett's good for 1 or 2 turnovers, including last week, a bad one, while they were driving down on the New York Jets after the Jets came back and took the lead in the fourth quarter. And Brissett threw an into to end that ball game. So right here, the Steelers, they know their offense has been a struggling point for them so far this season. And their defense is going to have to carry them a little bit. And I think in this ball game, in a divisional matchup here in week 3 on Thursday Night Football, the Steelers defense is going to make a few plays, and they could definitely put up a similar type of performance like they did in week 1. I'm not saying they're going to hit 26 fantasy points, but I think they could get somewhere from 15 to 20 possibly here. Brissett, we know he's more of a backup than a starter at this point of his career, and we know he don't have that many weapons. Amari Cooper, I know, had a good game last week, but he's a guy that disappears for games on ends as well. And right here, I think this Steelers defense gets back on track and has a good fantasy day in week 3. Number 5, the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Eagles, their defenses look good, especially on Monday Night Football in week 2 versus the Vikings, putting pressure on Cousins consistently. Dalvin Cook really didn't do much in that ball game and causing a few turnovers. Week 1 at Detroit, it was a shootout in that one, no doubt about it. 35 points allowed, a sack and a pick 6 in that one. In week 2 versus Minnesota, Demarius Slay, what a ball game he played on Justin Jefferson with 2 interceptions, and they only gave up 7 points, 2 sacks, and 3 intos to a great offense like the Vikings. So week 3, they versus old friend Carson Wentz, now on the Washington Commanders, obviously, and this one's in Washington. So right here, the Eagles, their defense has been added in a decent amount of fantasy leagues, but it's still out there in over 50% of leagues here. So I think their defense can make a few plays on Carson Wentz, but I also could see this Washington team scoring some points as well in this game. But the D, I think, will get a few turnovers. Wentz is good for at least 1 or 2 per ball game here. And this Philadelphia Eagle defense, they should know the tendencies of Wentz since he was over there for 4 seasons with Philadelphia. So right here, I think they have another good week, this defense here. And like I said, Carson Wentz is good for a few turnovers, but he also could put 300 yards up on them. But I think this Eagle defense will get a few sacks, couple turnovers probably, and have a good week. Number 6, Bills. So the Buffalo Bills, a tough matchup at the Miami Dolphins. After we saw the damage the Dolphins did to the Ravens defense, putting up 42 points and 2 were throwing for 6 touchdowns, and having 2 wide receivers go over 150 yards in Waddle and Tyreek Hill. But the Bills defense so far, they've been the best defense easily in fantasy football in the season. Week 1 at the Rams, 17 points, 10 points allowed, 7 sacks, 3 interceptions. In week 2 first, the Titans, they couldn't get anything going. 7 points allowed again, 2 sacks, 2 windows of 2 fumble recoveries, and a touchdown in that one. So right here, week 3 in Miami, it's going to be a tough test for this Bill defense, but I don't think they're not going to be within the top 6 here. I still think they could get to Tua a few times. I think they could get a few turnovers in this ball game, and they know what Tua does. Last season, early in the year, in a ball game in Miami, they knocked Tua out of the game, and then this defense pounced and had a huge ball game. So right here, this defense is playing good. Von Miller's been a huge addition so far for them in the first 2 games, getting pressure on the quarterback and just making everyone else free open and get to the quarterback as well. So right here, even with a tough matchup and a divisional matchup in the AFC East here, I think this Buffalo Bill D has a good ball game, and I got them in number 6. Number 7, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Bucs so far this season, their defense has outplayed their offense. Tom Brady in the offense still trying to figure things out, and they have a lot of guys missing on that offense at the wide receiver position as well. But anyway, this defense so far this season has played great football. Week 1 at Dallas, 3 points allowed, 4 sacks, and interception, including a break into the thumb for Dak Prescott in that one. In week 2 at the Saints, they wore him out in that 4th quarter. 10 points allowed, 6 sacks, 3 interceptions, 2 fumble recoveries, including the pick 6 by Dean in that one to put that game on ice. So week 3 here, tougher matchup versus the Packers. But the thing is here with the Packers, they're going to rely a lot on their running backs once again, I believe, in this ball game. And Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. So Aaron Rodgers, I think this is going to be the game plan for Tampa Bay to stop the run here and let Rodgers try to beat him. Not that Rodgers has lost it and he's not a good quarterback. He just don't have many weapons. And when you got Sammy Watkins at this point of his career as one of your main options on offense, that's going to be tough for any quarterback to put up numbers and be consistent. So last week, Rodgers, a decent game versus the Bears, but it was more of the Aaron Jones show. And this defense is one of the better defenses in the league here, is Tampa Bay. So the first 2 weeks coming out of the gate, built on defense and running the football. Right here in week 3, I think we're going to see more of the same, especially if Mike Evans' suspension holds up here, especially if Julio and Godwin don't play. Brady's going to be playing with Rashad Perriman and Russell Gage as his top 2 targets at wide receivers. So this Buck defense, home opener, Aaron Rodgers coming to town. Last season, they did a number on Rodgers and that Packer offense, and I think once again they could do it in this week's ball game. Number 8, the Cincinnati Bengals. So the Bengals so far, Super Bowl hangover, I believe, for them in the early going. And this week they got a pretty good matchup on paper at the New York Jets. The Jets here won a great ball game last week, coming back from 30-17 with under 2 minutes left. And this Bengal team got off to a bad start. Pittsburgh wore them out with a great game on defense. And then the Dallas Cowboys, they played a good game versus the Bengals and beat them at the buzzer 20-17. So right here, week 3 at the Jets this season, they got some weapons on the offense. And last season with Mike White at quarterback, the Jets did beat the Cincinnati Bengals. But I think the Bengals here, they got to get it on track. 4-0-3, that's a big hole to climb out of. And I think they go in to MetLife Stadium and play a good game on defense versus the Jets and get it. Because Joe Flacco, yeah, he's looked pretty decent, and he's already attempted 103 passes so far in the early going this season. But I think this Bengal defense could get to Joe Flacco in this one. And the key to making any team easy to stop is making them one-dimensional. So if this Bengal offense could just get off to a quicker start than they have in the first 2 weeks of the season here. I think they can make plays in this game versus Joe Flacco and the New York Jets. And their defense this week that I got at number 9, even though the first 2 weeks, like I said, they didn't do much. Week 1 versus Pittsburgh, 2 fantasy points. And week 2 versus the Cowboys, 4. But right here in week 3, I think it's a good bounce back for them. Number 9, the Dallas Cowboys. So the Dallas Cowboys, so far they're playing pretty good defense as a unit here, especially Micah Parsons. This guy possibly could win Defensive Player of the Year when it's all said and done this season. So this Cowboy defense last season improved, especially with the turnovers and making plays, but they still don't make the big stops in the big fourth quarter drives or even on big third downs at times. But in terms of fantasy football, I think they could put in a decent effort week 3 at the New York Giants. So week 1 versus Tampa Bay, 19 points allowed, 2 sacks, and an intho. And week 2 versus Cincinnati, 17 points allowed, but 6 sacks. So like I said, they could get to the quarterback. And this New York Giant offensive line isn't that great here. I know Daniel Jones is pretty mobile for a quarterback here, but the Cowboys over the last few seasons, for the most part, have dominated this New York Giant team. And I know Dak Prescott's out, and this defense could be on the field a lot in this ball game if they have a few 3-and-outs early, but I think they could get to Daniel Jones a few times. And for the most part, Daniel Jones is good for a turnover or 2 per ball game. So right now, I'm going to have the expectations pretty low for this Cowboy team. Not great fantasy points, but it's the number 9 defense this week. I think it's a decent place where I'm going to have them. Number 10, the Kansas City Chiefs. So the Chiefs here, so far, looking like a well-oiled machine. 2-0 to start the season. I know the defense hasn't done much, but last week, a big 99-yard touchdown pick 6 changed that ball game around. And they finished up with a good one versus the Chargers in terms of fantasy points for the defense. So week 1 at the Cardinals, 21 points allowed, 3 sacks. And week 2 versus the Chargers, 24 points allowed, 2 sacks, including that pick 6 that saved their fantasy day. So right here, week 3 at Indianapolis, if Michael Pittman don't play in this ball game again, this Chiefs game, them being a top 10 defense here. And Matt Ryan, so far, he hasn't looked good in the first 2 games with his new team as an Indianapolis Colts. So right now, the key is stopping Jonathan Taylor and having Matt Ryan trying to beat you. And I think in the indoor game here in the Dome, and obviously Indianapolis, this is what Kansas City's going to do. And this week here is a top 10 defense. I think they're fine, and they're available right now in over 50% of fantasy leagues. So I definitely, if I need a defense and have worse options, I would go with Kansas City this week, field day, like the Jacksonville Jaguars did last week when they shut out the Indianapolis Colts 24-0. The 11th defense this week's the Cleveland Browns. So the Browns last week got embarrassed at home in the home opener at the Dog Pound after they were controlling that whole football game. And then the last 2 minutes, just bad breakdowns, secondary being leaky, Corey Davis getting behind them for a 70-plus yard touchdown, and then losing an onside kick, and the Jets driving down on a shorter field to win the ball game. So right here, it's a Thursday night football game here tonight versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the Steeler offense, they're just not getting it going with Mitchell Trubisky at quarterback. So far, Deontay Johnson and Claypool haven't done much, and Najee Harris came into the season banged up with the sprained foot here, and he hasn't been the same so far in the early going. So this Brown team, I think this could be a close ball game, mid-teens, low 20s between the 2 teams. And I'm not that big on this Brown defense after what the Jets did to them and what they've done the first 2 weeks. Week 1 at Carolina, 24 points allowed, 4 sacks, and an intho. And then last week versus the Jets, 31 points allowed, 2 sacks, and a fumble recovery. So right here versus Pittsburgh, I think it'll be a lower scoring type of game. Sits into the divisional game, and these teams know each other. And plus, Mitchell Trubisky is just not a starting quarterback anymore in this league. So right here, I think the Browns can make a few plays, but I'm not getting my hopes up high for this Cleveland Brown team, because I could see it even going the other way like it did last week versus the Jets. So right here, this Brown team, I got 11 in the 12th and final defense I'm ranking this week. San Francisco 49ers. So the 49ers so far on the defensive end of things coming into the season, they won one of the top defenses ranked. And the first 2 weeks, they've been pretty decent. Week 1 in Chicago, in that wet ball game in rain, 19 points allowed, 2 sacks in an intho. And week 2 versus Seattle, a big ball game, no points allowed, 2 sacks, 2 intros, a fumble recovery. So they had the shutout on defense and special teams. The Seahawks had a block kick for a touchdown in that ball game. And week 3 here, they go to Denver on Sunday Night Football. And this Denver Bronco offense, they just can't find it. And people even think Russell Wilson's best days are behind him. He's just not in sync with his wide receivers. He's not in sync with the offense as much, and he's not as accurate as well here. So right now, this 49er team, obviously, they're very familiar with Russell Wilson after versing him for years in that NFC West division here. So I think they could get to Russell Wilson a few times in this one. Russell Wilson, he hasn't been putting up numbers over the last season and a half, really. Last season was a struggle for him, and so far this season's been a struggle. So I think this 49er defense, I'm not saying they're going to have a monster game like they did last week with 15 fantasy points, but I think this week here, they could get to Wilson a few times and keep this Bronco offense scoring down, especially if Jerry Jeudy might not play in this game. So that's the top 12 defenses I'm ranking here for week 3 of the fantasy football season.